welcome to another broadcast of The Soul of the Everyman on the ArtistFirst radio network. All past broadcasts are in podcast form, and you can download them at ArtistFirst.com. We welcome your questions and comments anytime. Hit us up at DJ@ArtistFirst.com. And now here they are, Michael and Margaret Lyons.
Thank you very much, Z-Man. And it is Michael and Margaret Lyons.
Hi.
Hi. We have identified ourselves, and now the black helicopters are circling again. I don't know what's going on out there. It must be spring. Because you get the spring fever, or the whiskey, or something.
Oh, all right.
I speak for myself. You haven't spoken much.
Okay.
Out there.
I am sitting.
Sitting. Well, tonight. We are going to talk about something very interesting tonight, and it will not be spring, and it will not be whiskey, and it may or may not involve chains and whips. It may involve chains. It actually tonight we're going to talk about choices, really, more than chains. But the interesting thing about choices is that they can become metaphorically chains.
Yes.
This was an insight that Margaret found in one of her books. Just to give you a little inside baseball, Margaret has pithy insights on a nearly every 10 millisecond basis all the time.
Don't believe them.
Well, maybe every 47 seconds. But anyway, you do. And the good ones, the ones that she finds intriguing or interesting or wants to talk about later, she jots down in a book of wisdom, which actually glows at night. Faintly.
It's just so bad.
Because so much wisdom in it. But we found this interesting thought, and I'll just lay the thought out, and then we can talk about which is choices that are made out of fear. Don't just stay choices. What they do is they basically become habits, especially if you make them again and again. And what they become, if you continue making these choices, is they become chains. They actually become a cage that envelops your spirit, cages you, weighs you down, and they, in essence, become an unconscious substitute for your own true identity. And I thought that was such an interesting, it was much longer when Margaret wrote it down initially, but we tried to condense it. I thought it was such an interesting thought that would be the subject for the Soul of the Everyman tonight, choices.
Do you have the original that I had sent to you?
I do not.
Okay.
But let's just go for it.
All right. Well, it's the idea that the choices, in general, the choices that you make habitually become habits, whether good or bad. But the choices that you make out of fear can turn into this containment for you, your cage, because you won't go past that habit form. As I said, habits in general, once you've accepted a habit, you've taken that whole pattern and shoved it into a mostly unconscious state. I've made that decision before, and this one, and this one, and this one. So you go follow that tree all the way through and just redo it over and over again whenever you're presented with the same choice. That form, that pattern begins to ossify, solidify, and it can become this, I think the word that people have used before is stronghold. where you're sitting in the middle of your stronghold, and this is where you are, and this is where you're going to stay. And not realizing that you have actually chosen that structure. Many times people believe that it's a natural thing. You know, oh, this is just who I am. I always do this.
Well, that's the important point that you made before. The the ego starts to identify itself with the habits.
You know, I'm always this way. I'm always angry about this, or I'm always, what's the word? Critical. Oh no, that's who I am. I'm just picky. You know, not realizing that you've actually created that habit form.
Well, and I want to back up a little bit because there's two or three things there. First of all, the ossification that you're talking about can actually be physically reflected in pathways, neurological pathways in the brain. And when you make choices in moments of high stress or moments of high emotion, they tend to, in essence, burn their way, not physically burning, but in essence become a preferred channel in the brain because it's driven by the survival instinct. When you're afraid or under a lot of stress, your brain is swamped with all kinds of stress hormones and cortisols and all sorts of things, and that affects the neurons in such a way that they are receptive, very receptive to memories, patterning, pathways. So it's much easier to make that habit when it's done under stress.
If you think of it almost like a road, at first it's just a single thought, so it's a single pathway. And then you get person after person walking on it. Eventually you get vehicles going on it. And then suddenly you've got a major highway in your head, and you immediately just go there.
Right. Exactly correct. Because the conductivity of that path, if you look at it physiologically, becomes the resistance becomes lower and lower. All things sort of channel in there, and you can see this type of thinking in the macro when you were saying it. When people say, "Well, I'm always this way. I'm just picky. I'm just that. I'm just this," without realizing that stronghold, which has now become almost aspects of personality, is walling yourself off from change. Some of the interesting things that have gone on in psychotherapy and in both sort of traditional talking it out or play acting it through, as well as using certain types of drugs. Ketamine is one of the ones that's been used a lot, because ketamine, which by the way is like a horse tranquilizer, but it has the ability to kind of reset your brain. The other thing is psilocybins. I'm going to say it wrong, but basically peyote buttons are used, or LSD, which is interesting. These things have sort of a negative connotation in people's minds because they've been kind of say, oh, you're on buttons or on whatever, you're on drugs. But all drugs can be abused, even aspirin. But used in a clinical setting, these types of drugs have an effect of resetting the brain, and people who suffer from severe trauma-induced PTSDs and things like that, pathways that have been burned in their brains. This is a way for them to it'll help lever themselves out. There are lots of different ways. It isn't just one, you take a pill and you're good. But to walk backwards, there were initially choices. Maybe, especially in times of high stress, you don't feel that you had a choice, but there is a choice made. And then that pathway, as you said, first is just one thought walking down this way, but it becomes a trodden, it becomes a beaten path, it becomes a mud track, it becomes something which can, in essence, wall off a certain section of your brain from doing anything but that behavior, almost with exclusion of all of. And I'll add one more thing. Interestingly enough, the initial survival mechanism, may have worked that time, but it becomes an impediment later on because, in essence, you're reacting to something which is not actually happening. From the initial stimulus, the trigger, you react in a way that is burned in, but isn't actually effective in helping the current situation. It's sort of a replay, you know.
Well, you at that point you're see that maybe this is the foundation of why people tell themselves stories, because they get triggered a certain way and they've got that pathway burned in, and so they follow it through, believing that this is a pattern of reality. So let me see how this fits to here, and if it hits at enough points, then that must be what's going on.
Right.
So that's interesting, because is this the way we wind up telling ourselves stories?
I think the brain, there's a couple things that I've read about that. One is the brain is very good at justifying actions, either at the moment or even in ex post facto, you know. In essence, you get someplace and you say, why did I do that? And the brain comes up with a very facile, convenient explanation for why. And part of that is because there's sort of a feedback loop. Well, I must have had a reason to do this, so here I am. But the stories part of it oftentimes are leaping forward. They start from let's say they do start from a fact or an event, and then leap forward to a conclusion, and then regardless of events or actual facts, you have, in essence, a sort of confirmation bias. You're like, well, of course they're going to do this because this is what always happened before, you know. And again, this can, because, you know, we're hardwired to survive and to make sense of the world quickly in these stress situations. This can be advantageous, but if it becomes sort of a burned-in habit that is not advantageous, it's difficult to shake, both physically and in the psyche itself. You know, your habit form becomes comfortable, regardless of how good or bad it is. It becomes a comfortable thing to do, an easy thing to do, a thing you don't have to do, as you said, without thought. It's all subconscious. You know, you're just angry, and you don't know why, but you don't care. You're like, I'm angry, you know.
I'm wondering if that is the mechanism where you wind up forming your I know file. Okay, it's like you're putting together certain certain little patterns or modules that in a file, and this is, you're going to put this in your I know file. So you come up with, well, I've had this experience and this is the way it happened. So once you've gone through that whole thing and researched it, because you don't close up the file and put it into the I know drawer until you're satisfied that you finally know it. Okay. And the funny part about it is that that's ossified thought. It's not just access of knowledge. It's believing that it never changes because you've researched it to the nth degree, and therefore it's in my module, and I'm going to put it into my I know drawer.
And I think I like that, but I think there's certain things, of course, that could be put there without harm. But there are, I think, behaviors, habits, patterns of reacting can harm. Let me give you an example. Things that can be put there without harm is, I know spring comes after winter every year, and just as a stupid example. That's fine. Or it's something that has a truly factual basis that is in fact going to be mostly true for let's say your foreseeable lifetime. That works. Is it absolutely true? These things are debatable. You can say, well, no, it can't be if you go far enough back. It may not be if you go far enough in the future, but that doesn't much matter. I think the things that should become pathological are when you say, well, I know XYZ person is out to get me because I saw them do this, and I know that whenever they do this, they're absolutely going to do that next, and then that's going to happen, and then this, and at the end of the day, I'm going to get the short end of the stick. That it's such a chain of assumption based on almost no facts, except perhaps prior experience or even just a similar situation which happened perhaps far in the past that becomes a habit or becomes like a reaction pattern. These are the ones that can become harmful in the I know file. When you tuck those in and short circuit, you really short circuit people as well as yourself.
Well, the awareness has got to be there for you to be able to go into that file and say, this bunch of experiences or patterns was motivated by fear. If you can distinguish between the fear and just information, then that's a huge leap in consciousness, because most people don't look at fear, they run from fear. But to be able to hold presence and look at it and say, this whole pattern was based on fear. Can you separate yourself from the fear of the experience? Most people, it takes time.
It takes tremendous courage and insight, and probably assistance. Whether it's a therapy or some other type of nature, because one thing we didn't mention is these habit forms, and you just kind of did just mention it. These habit forms have a self-perpetuating nature in that they defend themselves. If you start to try to examine them, the first emotions that come up are perhaps fear, or I was traumatized, I was in pain, I was threatened with my very existence, an existential threat. And so this both powers the memory or powers this pathway, but it also, I think, makes people shy away from it. I don't want to go there. I don't want to even think about it. The trigger is not a think. It's a bam, poof. You go from 0 to 60 in a split second. You don't go examine. The part is, why am I doing this? And even this goes back to some of the stuff we talked about with emotions, but it's similar. Even if you find yourself triggered and angry and screaming, and then perhaps later, hours later, you say, "Why did I do that?" But you have to find the presence of mind that you said to stop yourself before you get to the screaming part. And that's very difficult.
Well, it's acknowledging what is actually happening in the moment. If you can do that, because living in the moment allows for an awareness to hold center. So if you are having an emotional upsurge that's flowing through you, to be able to acknowledge that is unfolding, but you are observing yourself in this moment, going through the emotion. That is understanding that your consciousness is separate from the emotion. And if that's the case, your consciousness decides whether or not it really wants to go through that again. Because you got to get tired of going through this well-worn path. Oh, here we go again. I'm just going to go and do this, or blow up, or have a screaming fit, or cry in a heap somewhere. You got to get tired of, enough of this. There's more to life than me in a heap or me screaming at something. There's more. I choose.
I think that's a wonderful point, because it goes back to some of the things we talked about, coming to the end of oneself. Getting sick of your own behaviors is one thing that addicts get when they hit rock bottom. They're like, I can't go on like this. If I continue this way, I'm either going to destroy myself or die or whatever. And they reach a point where they must find a different way. This is more subtle, but it is almost the same thing. You have to become almost disgusted or distressed enough with your own behavior, with the consequences perhaps of your own behavior, that you then find a way. You have to say, the presence of mind that I have to find out why. I have to go back and examine this somehow. That's just the first step, but it is a very important one.
It's a significant one. You are at that moment taking command of yourself. And we all want to be in command of ourselves. But to do that, you must also take responsibility for what had unfolded before.
Yeah, that's part of it.
You may have been a victim of something, but that's not who you are.
Right.
And you have to discover who you actually are is not a victim. In that moment, in that event, you may have been. But that's not who you are. You're more than that.
You mentioned it earlier, and I think it's exactly right, that this stronghold, which may not actually be strong, but it is a fortress of sorts, is not who you are. And even though you feel safe in there to some extent, you know where you think the terrors are.
But that's what I mean. You've chosen this particular stronghold pattern out of fear. I choose this because I don't want that. So I put the wall up over here.
Right.
I choose this other thing because I don't want that thing over there. So I put the wall up over here. And you continually put these patterns of behavior up until you've made a fortress around you that no one can enter, nor can you extend yourself out from that, because that's the fallacy, believing that you can actually have an intimate relationship with anyone when this massive habitual fortress of patterns, your walls, that's even in the language, the walls are up.
Walls are up. And it's exactly right. Now, of course, there are degrees of everything. To some extent, everyone has these little stories they tell themselves. We all do. This is almost unavoidable. But it is the degree to which they have become entrenched or really become burned into your behavior. I think there's also, as far as toxicity is concerned, there's a degree to how much trauma or pain or how much stress was in the original event or subsequent events that turned it into a real wall that harms. Because tiny stories that people tell themselves are always there all the time. Of course, they're not good, but they're not necessarily as harmful as something based on a much deeper trauma, a much deeper abuse, whatever it may have been.
If you're telling yourself a story that's based on fear, and it's understandable, you don't want to have to handle the fear again.
Exactly.
Okay, I get it. But at the same time, you begin putting together a different internal reality from what's actually happening outside. And that's where the dissonance happens.
Exactly.
You start breaking yourself into pieces instead of being one whole individual, a whole human being, a being. You break yourself up into these fragments that are disconnected one to the other. And it's a pain. That's a painful experience when you start breaking yourself up like that.
Very, not only extremely true, but we've also likened this in the past in other shows. You leave a portion of yourself in the past. You could look at it physiologically as something burned to the brain, but in essence, there's energy. If we just talk in general about energy, there's your own life energy tied up in this pattern. And if it's usually based on trauma in the past, it can be tied up in the past, turned into something which has no life, which does not allow itself to. You have to inflate it. You have to keep it warm. You have to leave a piece of yourself, a fragment of yourself, always keeping that story alive. Now, multiply it. If you have 5, 10, 50, you've now fragmented your personality, and in some ways substituted, as we said in the beginning, these chains, these let's call them reaction chains, walls for whom you are. You identify with them. You say, well, I'm this and I'm that.
Well, it's not personalities, it's your being energy that gets fragmented. Not personalities are different.
Yeah, it's a loaded term because we're not talking about multiple personality disorder. We're talking about you, but fragmented into maybe the past and certainly these toxic behaviors.
It's soul fragments. You're breaking your soul up, and that's not what you're here to do.
No, far from it. But I think this is good. It sort of gives us the flavor of the thing. But we had a very interesting quote, which is probably going to go up on the website soon, from Samuel Johnson, and it's been echoed down, and you can probably find it on the internet attributed to other people. But I believe the original was from Samuel Johnson, and he said the chains of habit are generally too weak to be felt until they are too strong to be broken. And it's a beautiful way of saying that these are subtle things in the beginning, or they're things that feel small, or don't have the force that they will gather. Basically, as you exercise this, like anything, as you exercise this behavior, it doesn't mature, it doesn't grow, it doesn't develop. It just gathers strength from you, like a parasite will. And it grows, but only in the bent, sort of twisted way that it wants to grow, not in a way that actually develops, changes. It sucks life out of your present and into this static thing, which is in the past, in essence. And that can become, as he says, too strong to be broken, or not really, but takes a tremendous amount of courage and perhaps a tremendous amount of work to start to unwind those chains.
It's worth it, though. It's worth it because you want freedom.
Yes. Yes, and I think the important thing here is that these fragments of yourself want to be rejoined. But I think let's talk a little bit more about these fragments and about chains and about this topic on the other side. We'll rejoin ourselves on the other side of the commercial break, and we'll talk more about choices.
The Fat Man Gets Out of Bed is the latest book from Michael Lyons, the award-winning author of There is a Reaper. Featuring 13 original stories, this wide-ranging collection has everything. Forbidden love, gods versus demigods, weird invading aliens, sexy seductive artificial intelligence, and unusual passion between the living and the dead. All set amidst fantastic worlds of pain and loss and boundless joy. From the sublime to the macabre to the bittersweet, The Fat Man Gets Out of Bed will leave you breathless with laughter, brimming with tears, trembling with suspense. Available now on Amazon.com, Google Play, iTunes, Kobo, and fine e-tailers everywhere. The wait is over. First Blood, Book 2 of the Blood series is out. Your favorite bad boy thief, Dev, is back, and the beautiful and deadly Trey is right there with him. She is sharp, sexy, and full of surprises. Their adventures continue as a new power arises to threaten the world. The heart of creation is under attack, and time is definitely not on their side as they battle against their enemies' undead hordes. Can they unlock the hidden power that can defeat him, or will his forces draw first blood? Get all 3 installments in the series. Book 0, It's in the Blood. Book 1, Destroyer's Blood, and the new release, Book 2, First Blood, today. Available in ebook and paperback format on Amazon, Kobo, Apple, and most other fine e-tailers.
Rick Riordan fans, love mythology with plenty of action and humor? Destroyer's Blood is for you. The new fantasy novel by award-winning author Michael Lynes is Book 1 of the Adventures of Dev Kalian, the Blood series. Follow Dev and his magic sword Betrayer as they are suddenly attacked and forced to return to Olympus to fight in a war they want no part in. The world of men and gods is about to be destroyed by Zeus's ancient foe, and only Dev and Trey can stop him. The conflict never stops, and the amazing twist will have you on the edge of your seat. Act now while the ebook is on sale for only 99 cents. Destroyer's Blood is available on Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, iTunes, Kobo, and fine e-tailers everywhere. And while you're there, get the free prequel, It's in the Blood, available for a limited time.
Hi, this is Hannah Ruth from the band Wild Hum. Check out our new Americana Soul CD, Wild Hum, at our website, wildhummusic.com. And you are listening to the ArtistFirst Radio Network. Thank you.
There is a Reaper is the story of 5-year-old Christopher Aaron and his life-changing struggle with leukemia. Winner of both the Indie Bragg Medallion as well as the reader's favorite silver medal for memoir, There is a Reaper has more than 100 Amazon book reviews and a 5-star rating. It has been described as life-changing, spiritual, a must-read. Just released on Audible and iTunes, this memoir is also available in paperback and on Amazon Kindle for only 99 cents. Get your copy of this life-changing memoir today.
Thanks for joining us on The Soul of the Everyman on the ArtistFirst Radio Network. Back to your hosts, Michael and Margaret Lyons.
Thank you very much, D-Man. And see, that wasn't so bad, was it? We are rejoined on the other side.
Here we are.
Right, we're back in our old habit form. And you people are stuck with it. But I'm sorry, Margaret. You at the end of the we broke off a little bit abruptly because the problem we get into, just a little inside baseball, is we get into the topic and the half hour just flies by. So I'm sorry, we kind of interrupted your thought there at the end.
I had a thought.
I think you did, but we can continue in this vein. We were talking about multiple, in essence, the fragments of yourself that are broken apart, and that initially, unless trauma is extremely, unless trauma is bad, it's existential, it's really painful, it's really that these initial kind of pathways are not necessarily something which have that right away a toxic effect.
See, this is where we started before. It had to do with choices.
Right.
Okay. And choices don't stay choices. They become habits.
Right.
And understanding that when you are in that moment of choice and you continually make the same choice, that becomes automatic. And you do it without really reconsidering anything else. It's just, I always choose this.
Right.
And the point was that you begin to believe that that's who you are. I always do this. I and this become equal in your head. You identify with that choice you made.
Right.
But you're not your choice. You've put it into the automatic realm. To really make a choice, you have to be able to be aware enough to consider what is going on. When it's done by default, now that we have computers, we can say that. This is the default setting. Your habits become your default setting.
You mentioned last half hour about the I know file. And that's, I think, that's a great analogy for this, because even without trauma, even without all these other things, people develop this I know file, and it is impervious to new information.
Mm-hmm. No, that's the truth. That is real. You've put it in the file drawer and you've closed it, and nothing else goes in. And it's understanding that. That was the process that you went through. You are no longer open to learn. You've closed your file.
Ossified, which is what you said, just last half hour. And this ossification of thought is, I would say, a lower level of this of the trauma and the psychoses and the fragments. This is making yourself into, it's chains, it's a cage, it's the I knows, but it really is just rejecting reality, and substituting your own. In essence, you're saying, I know. And you hear people say this when you try to tell them, oh, I know, which really means, shut up. I don't want to hear from you.
Right. I already know this. You don't have to tell me anything.
Right.
And you sit there and you go, but you're not solving your problem. You're just redoing it.
Or the W word.
What?
You're wrong. People hate, I think there's the I knows are because people hate to be unsure or wrong. And if you suggest to them that perhaps what they're doing isn't correct anymore. Go ahead.
See, but that's a classification in your own head of whether it's good or bad, okay? So
right.
I'm not talking about that. What I'm saying is the choices, everyday choices that you make, become the foundation of your way of interacting with your outer world. And to make the choices consciously is the discipline of your own internal mind. It's choosing to do that as opposed to going to default. To embrace life means that you're walking in the moment of now, this time and this space.
Right.
To do that, you don't have any preconceived notions. It is. So walking in what is allows you to make choices. When you habitually make a choice because, well, we've always done it this way, you're not walking in the moment. You are already projecting what you believe is going on. There's no room for new data.
I would say that also the identity of yourself with that behavior, that pattern, gathers a charge, which is, I'm right when I do this, and yet when you identify with it, it is me. This is what we do, what I do, I. And then if you try to change it, if you try to tell somebody that they're wrong, it isn't just there's new information. It's you're judging me bad. I have judged me good to do this, and you're saying I am bad. And so it immediately becomes an emotional conflict because they have identified with it. That's what I was saying with the wrong part is, it's like an attack. when you tell them that these things are,
They-
it might not be true anymore.
It has become personal.
Right.
And you cannot see what's actually unfolding in front of you. So to be able to detach from it is the discipline internally that is needed, not to, again, we're going back to detach from outcome.
Yes.
Because the projection is always what the outcome is going to be. If you detach from the outcome, you are giving your consciousness a platform on which to stand. I observe.
Right.
What is.
Right. And then you can actually choose.
Then it becomes a choice. Otherwise, it isn't a choice.
Well, I was just going to say, but this is exactly right. Once you have formed a habit, you've actually foregone your choice. You don't. Doing what you habitually do may feel like a choice, but here's, I think, a trick where you can say to yourself whether it's a choice or not. If you can imagine yourself doing this thing that you always do, and then imagine that somebody told you it was wrong. If feelings of anger, frustration, of rejection, come up immediately, an emotional firestorm starts just from somebody telling you that this is wrong, you can right away say to yourself that maybe I'm not actually choosing this anymore, that this has now become a default behavior and something which I've identified with. Because why emotion comes is because you feel attacked. You feel personally attacked if somebody tells you, that's not right. If it's just an observation, you go, oh yeah, that doesn't work anymore. Let's try something else. And it's great. You're like, reality has moved on, that, things are different now. I'm still me. Reality is reality. I can choose to do the next thing. This is growth, change, good. And don't want to put the good on it. It's just growth and change and being in the moment. If it's like somebody plunging a dagger into your heart and you want to beat them up immediately because they told you this, it's time to start thinking that maybe this isn't a choice anymore. Maybe it's a default behavior.
It's a reaction. And if you are in this reaction, your perception isn't clean. You've already biased yourself somehow or some way, because this is what I always do.
I love that. I love that. Elaborate on that. Exactly. The not clean perception. That's really very, very evocative.
Well, I know your habit of seeing things a certain way. If it's a certain person, it used to be if someone saw a different skin color, then, according to the skin tone or the eye shape, or even just male or female, you were supposed to act this way. This is what you've come from. That kind of thinking, that was originally where it was. But understanding that people do that to other people regardless of whether it's a skin tone or an eye shape or an accent, they do it to just anybody. And that preconceived habit form is something that needs to be addressed, because it morphs. That habit of looking at someone, putting everything you think you know about them in a file, and then putting them in the I know file cabinet is the problem.
Yeah.
For everyone.
Right.
So coming to the core of that, your humanity, to understand that your mind does this. It does this. Every single human being does this. Be aware, because you are in charge of this. And you can choose to change.
This is exactly correct. And the perception part, You said it was unclean perception. You've heard people talk about rose-colored goggles. That's one way of putting it. Your vision, your perception, is divided, and I'll explain. There is the vision of the ego of the I, and I think the vision of the I is often clouded, often polluted. It can be polluted by these behaviors. It can be polluted by biases, by physical characteristics, whatever. The heart, which is the perception of the humanity, the perception of the eyes of the heart, is, I think, almost never occluded. It is in the now, in the moment, and uses resonance, it uses energy, it uses a clear sight. When people act in the heart, there is no, you mentioned skin tones or any other thing. When you see another human being in grave distress, and you are the only person there that could possibly help them, nothing else matters anymore. It's human to human. That is always at the heart, clear sight level. It's when you occlude that or ignore that and use the ego, let's call it the dirty or the polluted or the just the occluded sight level, that you can get limited, but also I think purposefully blinders are put up there. The ego likes to look through tiny little holes with the right color lenses and just the right shade. It's like a kaleidoscope. Oh yes, that's what I want to see. That's the ego.
True. But that is what we mean by building a cage for yourself. That you're only looking out this one small slit. That's the only thing you want to see.
Well, and that's the classic, the cave.
Right. Exactly.
Elaborate on that a little bit. I mean, that I could, or you could, but I mean that's Plato, right?
Socrates.
One of those two guys. But the cave is very similar to this stronghold or all these prejudices or all these limited perceptions of the ego. You are given this tiny little slit to look at shadows on the wall, and you call it reality. And the heart perception is leaving that cave or leaving that cage, which and what we've been talking about, you make that yourself. That's self-construct.
The interesting thing about this habit form where your choices suddenly turn into no choices, but a habit, this is kind of the way you bring groups of people together and sort of, we all do this.
Right.
This
mob mentality, sort of.
Well, that's more base. Mob mentality is much more base.
Cultures, then, we all do this. We're all,
In a family.
Yes.
This is what we do. This is what our people do.
Right.
Okay, and you just sit there and you go, okay, now we've gone tribal.
Yes, tribal. That's the word exactly. Our tribe does.
This is what we do, and to understand that it's not a bad thing at all, but it only becomes bad when you're trying to force somebody else into quote unquote accepted modes of behavior, denying them the freedom of choice, because this is what we all do. Okay, and for children especially, it can be difficult because you are not given any kind of choices. This is what we do. And if you question it, then, you're how dare you?
You're wrong.
Yes, of course. How could you possibly believe that? And in their effort to try to convince you otherwise, there's all kinds of things that they'll start throwing at you because you've got to conform to the way we think and the way we move and how we present ourselves.
Right. And this is interesting because these aren't really the chains of habit you necessarily form yourself. Sometimes these chains are thrown upon you.
Well,
You know, in that sense, they're being thrown upon you.
well, but this is my point. As children, you are very susceptible to this, and it takes a very long time to be able to come to a point to say, I choose, and to really understand what that means. It's not just, okay, you have a choice between pink or blue, or you know, some beverage of some kind, or, you know, you have the group giving you choices. Like, no, I love persimmon.
Me too, actually. But let me back. I mean, to some extent, your personal experience, because your folks were immigrants to the country, and you had a culture war going on in your own experience. So you can speak to this, and I know many people could speak to the same. There's a dissonance inside outside, what we do in the house, what's outside, and then there's this culture. Well, you know, if you're part of the family in the house, you have to do this, and then you go, what, you know, you go outside in let's call it the real world, and they don't do that, and that doesn't make sense, and the children are at that stress point. You know, which world do I belong in? You know, or which one is true? And it's difficult as a child to realize that there's a greater thing, that both can be true and both can be wrong, but that's not something that you have the necessary skills to navigate at that point. So
You can observe it, but as a child, you basically choose whatever is going to help you survive.
Yeah.
In that moment.
Yeah.
Because you realize that there are different bubbles of reality for people. You didn't think that was possible, but there you are. You're like, okay, if you're in the house, you have to do it this way. But if you're out in the real world, you have to act that way. Like, just in general, you're as a in the house, in an Oriental family, female, you must be submissive. But if you're out there in the real world, in the business world, or whatever you're doing, you have to be aggressive. You have to make these choices. You have to, and you're sitting there going, how does that fit with who I actually am?
Right.
And or you're talking to somebody else, and this is this one group over here where, you know, they have their own story, their own bubble.
Right.
You begin to realize that there's a lot of bubbles around you. It's like, wow.
Well, I think that's a very interesting observation, because if you have, if you're a perceptive, naturally perceptive person, you initially will say, well, okay, this must be the right way, and then you realize that no, that's not. You start to have a truth bomb go off in your head and say, wait a minute now, this isn't reality. This is just let's call it a bubble, as you said. And as an observant, in the moment person, you start to see the chains. You say, well, these guys this is the chains that they're dealing with, and here's the chains that they're dealing with. And so in freeing yourself, Plato's cave, whatever, you realize that there's a much larger universe. And that as our multiverse contains all these bubble universes, in small, society, or the world in general, has lots of bubbles. Some intersect, some are like oil and water, and they never come together. As you rise above this and realize that you are vast, and that all these bubbles have some degree of truth and some degree of lie, you can get perspective. You can start to say not only your own chains that you can perhaps free yourself from, but you can also say, well, you know, I know how to deal with this one. It's fine, because these are the chains that they would like to rattle. And if we want to talk, we'll rattle those chains. You know?
Yeah.
I'm mixing a lot of metaphors there. That was a metaphor stew.
But that's understanding that I go back to what we had said originally, the American Indian viewpoint. We're here to dream the common dream. But when you realize that people are carrying around them these reality bubbles, if you kind of think of them as they're all dreaming, and you can actually decide who you're going to interact with. You may interact with only a few, or maybe just one, or you can interact with all of them. But in order to do that, your own bubble has got to be so clear and so strong that there's nothing that's going to change it. Because people make the assumption that just because you're interacting with them, they have every right to change you, which I find
that's a good one.
Yeah, I find that fascinating.
That's the soul of the Everyman topic right there. But I don't want to. But I think the previous point, the vast, let's say you're growing your bubble. Maybe your bubble is the universe, but you grow to the point where your presence is able to interact at a efficient and communication level with many different bubbles. I saw you did it a lot in the store because you had every type, many different types of people coming in for one thing, these rocks and gems, but yet they all had their own stories about them. But finding a way to communicate to each one of them and actually exchange some information and get them to be comfortable and to share and actually give them some information and some ability to converse back and forth, it means that you have to have the larger bubble. You have to be more accepting, more encompassing, strong in the sense that your identity is not for sale or for them to control, but yet you have the ability to share your dream with them and maybe open their bubbles just the tiniest bit. And I saw that happen a lot in the store. That was something that why people enjoyed coming there, is because they could have this conversation and not feel that they were, being manipulated or tried, just there to sell them something. And that was one thing that I think, as your perspective and your perceptions expand outward, eyes of the heart, not the ego eyes, you can interact with all these different people and find that even though they're in their strongholds, there are places where you can say, okay, we're going to have a parlay here. We're going to talk. And maybe the little sunshine inside and get them to take down one part of the wall, It does work that way.
Well, they're very lonely in those,
It's very lonely.
It is. I mean, you're not sharing anything with anybody, so you're going to be awful lonely in a condition like that.
I think that's also very insightful, because I think that when you wall yourself up, it is a lonely place, and that at a heart level, you're not doing the right. You're not doing what you should be doing here. You're not sharing. You're actually, gathering everything to yourself and keeping it very close, but also very lonely.
Yeah. Well, your heart goes, wait a minute. This is not what we're here for.
Right.
I'm supposed to be in contact and communicating with other people.
Well, I know what we're here for.
Oh?
We're here for the soul of the Everyman, for you people. But unfortunately, we're coming to the end of the hour. So we're going to have to break these chains and fly free. I hear Freebird playing somewhere in the background. But I'm Michael Lyons.
Oh, and I'm Margaret. And thank you for listening.